This video is sponsored by NordVPN. First, I apologize for the lack of uploads in the past month. I've been taking my time with Tears of the Kingdom, so my overall progress in it has been a lot slower compared to others. But I also really wanted to get something out, and since I'm not quite ready to make lore videos, I've chosen to put together an ultimate beginner's guide in which I'll be sharing tons of tips and tricks, whether it be cost-efficient Zonai vehicles or general advice on how to tackle things such as the Geoglyphs and other quests. Quick disclaimer that, while no story-related spoilers will be talked about, I will go over how to get abilities such as Autobuild or the camera, but any information regarding the side quests surrounding said abilities will be described as vaguely as possible. I'll also be talking about a few Zonai devices that haven't yet been seen in promotional footage, as well as the underground portion of Hyrule's overworld. So if you don't want to know about any of that stuff, then feel free to click off now. Without further ado, here's my ultimate beginner's guide to the Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. In Breath of the Wild, Link had access to the Paraglider, allowing him to more easily traverse the land of Hyrule. And while Tears of the Kingdom also has the Paraglider, Link will not acquire it until after reaching Hyrule's surface, meaning that you can technically explore the majority of Hyrule without ever having it. But not only does this make exploration a lot harder, it also means that certain sections will be almost entirely cut off. However, so long as you follow the main story, you will eventually unlock it. With that said, there are some other things you'll want to try unlocking as soon as you start the game, but rather than obtaining them through the main story, you'll instead get them in a side quest. Once you finish the quest line with the Paraglider, you can initiate a quest with two characters at that same settlement. You're meant to do this at the start, as it acts as an introduction of sorts to Hyrule's depths, the underground layer of the game. Completing this first quest will unlock both the camera ability and Hyrule Compendium. Doing so will open up some new quests for you. However, following this quest is another one. Completing this gives you access to an ability called Autobuild, making it significantly easier to construct vehicles, even if you don't have the necessary parts. With that said, if you somehow find this location prior to activating the side quest, you can still get this power. It's also relevant to another optional side quest that you're definitely going to want to do. A bit more information on that later. Another returning feature from Breath of the Wild is the Shrine Sensor, but in order to get it, you have to have already completed the quests associated with the Camera Rune and Auto-Build ability. I suggest looking it up yourself if you want additional details regarding this. This quest will also lead to a couple other useful features that are worth looking at. In Tears of the Kingdom, Hyrule Stables introduce a new sort of currency system called Pony Points. Once you get a certain amount of these points, you can exchange them for useful items. Every time you visit a new stable, you'll get one additional point, and something as simple as using the inn will also get you points. While there's a lot to unlock here, the one thing you should get your hands on immediately is the towing harness. Not only does this unlock some additional side quests, some of which you really want to do, but it makes Korok seed hunting much easier. All you have to do is fuse the Korok's backpack to the towing harness and bring him over to his friend. Just be mindful of how you attach the Korok, because in some positions it can constantly detach and it's really annoying. I find that it works best when you have the Korok facing away from the towing harness. The best part about this tip is that the towing harness is the first reward of the pony point system and only requires 3 points. That means if you register a horse at a stable and use the inn once, you'll have enough. One item you're going to be using a ton of, especially when in the depths, are Brightbloom seeds. These plants light up whenever you hit them with an arrow or weapon, shoot them with your bow, or simply throw them. Because of how big the depths are, you really can't ever have enough of these. Brightbloom seeds can be found in huge quantities in caves all across Hyrule's surface. My best piece of advice is to just collect any you see. However, something I found useful early on in my adventures was the fact that these plants stick not only to the ground or walls, but also your vehicles. Doing so can give you a permanent light source when traversing through the depths or at night. There are spotlights you can use, but not only do they consume power and add weight to your vehicles, they're also not nearly as effective. Another thing I like doing is attaching one to my horse's towing harness, which gives me a bit more visibility at night or during a rainstorm. I did try fusing one to Link's shield, but unfortunately it just plants itself wherever Link's standing. Even with the ability to fuse weapons, you're going to find yourself running out of inventory very quickly. And since Tears of the Kingdom also uses Korok seeds to increase inventory space, it means that finding Hestu early on is essential. And given the way this game works, it's entirely possible that you'll play dozens of hours without ever being able to upgrade your inventory simply because you can't find him. And his location will differ based on how far you've progressed. I'm going to be talking about 2 of the 3 possible areas to find him, since that last one is a tad spoilery. His first location will be here in close proximity to Lindor's Brow's Skyview Tower. After you've upgraded your inventory a total of 2 times, he then moves to Lookout Landing. This next bit is very important. Once you've progressed a certain amount in the story, you may notice that he's no longer in that first location. If that's the case, he will now be at Lookout Landing. And although he does change locations one final time, it's gonna be obvious where, as it's directly related to a specific quest. You likely already have an idea of where I'm talking about, but I do consider it spoilery as it's something we haven't seen in promotional footage. Link's abilities in Tears of the Kingdom completely break the game, especially when used together. There are an infinite amount of solutions to any sort of puzzle in this game, and it makes everyone's playthrough different. The 2 main reasons you'll be using these powers are for navigation or puzzles. So let's talk a bit more about Recall and how it can be used with Link's other abilities. Recall allows the player to reverse time on a singular object, and it does so with precise accuracy. It doesn't just apply to gravity. Any sort of movement that an object experiences can and will be recalled, so long as it happens within that time frame. You'll know how far an object will go by paying attention to the yellow line which appears before you select that object. Recall will also stay active if Link takes that time to swap to another power, meaning that you can combine this with Ultra Hand or Ascend. For example, I can use Ultra Hand on this block, lift it up as high as I can, then keep it here for a few seconds, and then lower it for another couple seconds, let go, switch to and use Recall on the object, jump on it, and then wait for the block to ascend upwards, allowing me to cross this gap. It's a great way to solve certain shrine puzzles that you may be stuck on. You could even add Ascend into the mix by simply jumping through the bottom of the block as it's being levitated by Recall. Another use for Recall is positioning gliders. Unless you have wheels attached to your wing or rockets to shoot it upwards, it's not really possible to take off from the ground. If we build our flying machine, and similar to our past example, move it as far as we can off the side of this floating island, bring it back to the ground, jump on it, and use Recall, it sets us up so we can fly with it in the sky. You should also get used to bringing out Recall whenever you make a mistake, like when a Korok or other item falls off a ledge. I can't tell you how many times this has saved me, and once you start doing it, it becomes second nature to bring this power out whenever you make an error. The ability to cancel it at any time is incredibly useful, and when an object is no longer affected by Recall, it just drops down. So for example, if you catapult a Korok to reach a higher cliff, but it overshoots, then just Recall it and stop it as it's directly above the platform. Lastly, if there's something you need to quickly grab as it's falling, rather than using Ultra Hand and likely missing, bring out Recall and wait until it's close enough to you. Then, activate the power and recall the object. There's a bit of a buffer before Recall takes effect. However, since it's possible to grab an object that's currently in the Recall state, you can just grab it as it's frozen in place. This automatically cancels the effect, and you're free to move it wherever you want. I was able to cheese this entire shrine because of this feature. There's a lot more you can do with this ability, but those are some of the more important things players should know early on. Most of the appeal of Tears of the Kingdom will be experimenting yourself to see what does and doesn't work. This is something that's already been talked about extensively, but it's worth bringing up here in case you've somehow missed it. In the depths, you start off with a blank map just like Hyrule's surface and Sky Islands. However, unlike them, the way you map out the underground layer is slightly different. All throughout the depths are these odd-looking trees called Lightroots. Once you activate a Lightroot, it both lights up the surrounding area and maps out the location. One interesting detail, though, is that Lightroots can be found directly beneath surface shrines. This means if you compare the underground map to the surface map, you'll easily find shrines that you haven't yet discovered. The reverse is also true. If you're struggling to find a Lightroot, all you need to do is look at the location of the surface shrines. Another quick tip to keep in mind is that the underground's terrain is inverted to the surfaces, so any spots with rivers will instead be huge walls. This can make navigation a bit of a pain, so I recommend looking at the surface map before descending. Since shrines are often located in close proximity to chasms, I recommend that whenever you find a new chasm or entrance into the underground, you quickly fall down and activate the closest Lightroot, and then you'll be able to teleport to that sometime later. Doing so will make it much easier to map out the depths given all of the steep walls and cliffs separating the sections. You should also enter the depths at any Lightroot which corresponds with a shrine that's at low elevation, since it will give you a high view of the area in the depths. This is more of a recommendation than anything, but if you care about Tears of the Kingdom story, do yourself a favor and make sure you do the geoglyph patterns in the correct order. I won't spoil what they do, however the completion of each one rewards you with a story-related thing. And whatever you do, make sure that the first one you complete is this one close to the new Serene Stable. It's in the same general area as the Lindor Brow's Skyview Tower. The reason this is so important is because if you go off on your own and accidentally complete a different one, that one may be paired with some story which has massive spoilers. With that said, how do you know what the correct order is? Step 1 is to complete the side quest associated with this first geoglyph. After that, the character will tell Link to go to a certain location. Make sure that you do this ASAP if you're wanting to complete more of these geoglyphs. I won't spoil much, but once you do go to this spot, pay close attention to the order in which these geoglyphs appear on the wall. You'll notice that the one you just finished is on the leftmost part. That is your starting point. This location will also give you hints as to where each geoglyph can be found. I recommend either using the Switch's built-in screenshot feature or using the camera rune to take pictures of this area so you don't have to keep coming back to check. Doing all of this will help you avoid any sort of story spoilers. There's no worse feeling than getting spoiled about something, especially when it's from a game or movie you love. Even I dealt with spoilers when playing Tears of the Kingdom for the first time. It's important to be careful when browsing the internet in general, and this does tie in with the sponsor of today's video. As frustrating as it can be, spoilers aren't the worst thing you can come across when on the web. It's also important to be wary of people who are trying to steal personal information like passwords, bank information, or home addresses. And if you're not using a VPN, this sort of thing may happen to you. Luckily, NordVPN currently has a deal giving you a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 1 additional month. All you have to do is go to the link in the description, nordvpn.com/NintendoBC. Connecting to any sort of public Wi-Fi network puts you at risk of having private information stolen. This is because anyone can set up their own network and rename it to something convincing like Starbucks free Wi-Fi. What a VPN does is encrypt this connection, not only protecting yourself from cyber attacks, but also lets you bypass region-locked content. Just go to the link in the description, nordvpn.com/NintendoBC, to get a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 1 additional month for free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee just in case you're not satisfied. That's nordvpn.com/NINTENDOBC. Throughout the game, you'll come across these gacha-like machines where inserting Zonai charges will give you a variety of Zonai parts to use in building. What each one gives you is predetermined based on what machine you're at. Something that I realized while playing is that if you need a certain part and aren't sure where to get it, simply highlighting the icon on the map will show you its contents. Do note that in order for an item to be listed, you have to have already gotten it from the gumball machine. So if there's an item still listed as ? You're gonna have to insert more Zonai charges until you receive it from the machine. One long-term goal you'll want to be focusing on in Tears of the Kingdom is upgrading your battery meter. Doing so lets you use Zonai devices for a much longer duration, which greatly helps with the exploration part of this game. But how exactly do you do this? Early on, you'll be introduced to a new ore called Zonaite. Zonaite has multiple uses, however the first one demonstrated in this tutorial is exchanging it for Zonai charges and crystallized charges. The first is rather self-explanatory, but crystallized charges are unique in that they're used to upgrade Link's battery. For every 100 crystallized charges, you can add an extra energy well onto Link's energy cell. Each battery is made up of 3 individual wells, so to get the 7 other vials, it requires 21 energy wells. Or to put it another way, 2100 crystallized charges. And this can later be doubled once you acquire all 8. One single crystallized charge costs 3 Zonaite, and the bundles of 20 cost 3 large Zonaite. Zonaite is primarily found in the depths layer of Hyrule, dropping from ore deposits as well as enemies. But for the most part, you're going to be mining it from the ore. This is a very good method of acquiring it early on in the game. However, it's something that you should only be doing passively. I suggest switching up your method of farming once you made some progress in Tears of the Kingdom. Not just because it will get very tedious, but also due to Zonaite's secondary use, Autobuild. I don't want to get into too much detail, however, it's wisest to save all of your normal Zonaite so that you can make full use of the Autobuild ability. You only get 1 crystallized charge per 3 Zonaite, unlike the 20 per 3 large Zonaite, and Autobuild does not use large Zonaite. In fact, unless you plan on upgrading certain armor sets, you might as well use large Zonaite exclusively for upgrading your battery. And this is speaking from experience. I used almost all of my Zonaite for the crystallized charges, and I'm now regretting it whenever I need to use Autobuild. But there's another more efficient way to farm for energy wells. Every single mini-boss in the depths will drop 20 crystallized charges when defeated, and this includes Lynels. These also respawn every blood moon. My recommendation is to immediately place a pin on your map whenever you come across a new mini-boss location, and soon enough you'll be able to plan out your own route in killing them. Every 5 mini-bosses you defeat is an additional energy well, and I recommend that you place down these pins when you're mapping out the depths. It's very quick and easy to do, and makes life a whole lot simpler later on in the game since you already know where to go for the mini-bosses. Do know, however, that if you are waiting for a blood moon to reset enemy spawns, you have to be on the surface or sky islands. Blood moons will not trigger when you are in the depths. Another thing worth noting is that there are certain underground bosses with chests that will give you a one-time reward of 100 crystallized charges. As for what these bosses are, you'll have to figure that out on your own. You can also get Zonaite and crystallized charges as rewards from quests and chests in the overworld, but those aren't reliable as farming methods. On the topic of vehicles, Autobuild is something you should be taking advantage of when traversing the sky, surface, and depths of Hyrule. Most of the contraptions you build will be for navigational purposes, and the sheer size of the overworld means that it's best to always have a sufficient supply of Zonaite or Zonai parts on you. And while it's fun to experiment with over-the-top creations like jet planes or mechs, it's a good idea to at least have 1 or 2 easy builds which consume only a small amount of Zonaite. Horses still are an excellent choice for surface exploration, and in many cases they are superior to ground vehicles. First, they don't consume any Zonaite. Second, there's no time wasted in the building process, you just hop on and begin exploring. Combine that with a towing harness, and it makes some tasks such as escorting Koroks both cheap and efficient. There are a lot of downsides, however. There are certain regions which make it nearly impossible to use a horse in, whether it be due to the mountainous terrain or severe climate. But what makes horses not nearly as useful in Tears of the Kingdom is the fact that, to my knowledge, the ancient saddle does not exist in this game. This means you can't whistle and have your horse teleport to you. If you ever need it, you have to either find where it is in the overworld or go to a stable to retrieve it. As of now, the most Zonaite-efficient vehicle is a steering wheel attached to 2 fans. This only costs 9 Zonaite and controls rather well. 2 designs include this one with both fans connected to the sides of the steering stick, but the most recent one resembles a bike. A video uploaded by user 2Uncle2Dane shows how to build this device. I'll have a link to his video in the description, but I'll quickly go over how to create this bike. First, place one of your fans face down. Next, rotate your steering stick at an angle so that the side with the handlebar is facing towards you. Now attach the opposite end to the top middle bit of the first fan like so. All you have to do now is position the second fan face down, similar to the first, and attach it to the front part. Before you save this design, make sure to test it out so that you know it works. You can add additional parts to help with the stability of it, but do remember that it'll increase the cost of Zonaite needed. This bike is perfect for overworld traversal, especially when combined with a Brightbloom seed in the depths. Once again, I recommend watching 2Uncle2Dane's video, which will be in the description below. Within the depths are these shadowy figures holding what the game refers to as Pristine Weapons. These are non-corroded versions of Hyrule's weapons. In order to start seeing pristine versions of a weapon, you have to have broken a decayed one at least once. If you're interested in learning more about pristine weapons, I recommend checking out PhillyBeatzU's guide. There's an abundance of materials to collect in Tears of the Kingdom, whether it be used in fusing, cooking, or combat. Some of which you'll be using frequently, such as bomb flowers or Brightbloom seeds, and if you're not careful, you may find yourself running out of these materials often. For the sake of time, I'm only going to be talking about the ones I frequently use. Since Zonai charges are required to obtain Zonai parts from the gumball machines, it makes them one of the most important resources to collect. Players can collect both types of Zonai charges from constructs upon defeat. Constructs are commonly found on Sky Islands, as well as Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons, but one of the best spots is the surface. Certain chunks of fallen debris will be surrounded by a group of constructs, which will respawn after a blood moon similar to regular monsters. So whenever you come across a construct camp, make sure to add a pin to your map. Sometimes there will be monster camps right beside a group of constructs, so if you're too weak to fight them, there's always the option of making them battle each other. Large Zonaite charges are also often found in chests. But there's another method of farming Zonai charges early on which is very efficient, although it requires you to have not completed a particular shrine. On the Sky Island above Hyrule Ridge is the Tanya Shrine. After solving the puzzle to unlock the shrine, you can enter it and complete a tutorial of sorts where you fight 3 different constructs. Each of these will drop some good weapons along with a Zonai charge when defeated. After you've killed all of them, simply teleporting out and re-entering will respawn them. You can repeat this process as many times as you like in order to farm Zonai charges. 3 other items you may or may not end up using often are bombs, puff shrooms, and muddle buds. All 3 of these are located within the depths around the big trees. Once you start keeping an eye out for them, you'll realize just how abundant they are. Of the 3, bomb flowers are the one you'll most likely be using. They're also found in overworld caves, but not nearly as often. Bombs can be used to destroy rocks, blow up monsters, and even act as launch pads when fused to Link's shield. Muddle buds are also useful, although I find myself making use of puff shrooms more. Fusing them to Link's gear will result in a smokescreen effect, letting you quickly take out enemy camps with silent takedowns without the need of fighting. And as a stealth player, I love using them, especially when it's in the early game. It lets me kill powerful monsters without the risk of dying, and in return I get more powerful gear. Another material worth farming is Sundelions. When cooked, these will restore hearts affected by gloom. Sundelions are frequently found on the floating islands, as well as the surface in places close to Sky Island debris. Dragon parts are also farmable in Tears of the Kingdom due to some changes made with the dragons themselves. Each one now has a set path which is repeated. You can also stand atop them as they fly throughout Hyrule. The way you obtain their parts is the same as Breath of the Wild, just shoot the body part you want a material of. However, there is a cooldown of 10 to 11 minutes before the players can repeat this process, so all you have to do is sit atop the dragon and wait it out. However, do be mindful of what climate condition you're in, as well as the fact that all 3 dragons can still damage you with their elemental attacks. And, of course, rupees. There are several ways to get rupees in Tears of the Kingdom. You can obtain them from side quests, cook and sell foods or elixirs, and what I consider to be the best method, selling ore. Honestly, I just mine whatever ore deposits I come across when exploring and kill plenty of Stone Talus mini-bosses. There are duplication methods, but I like to stay away from those. One new collectible added to this game is the Bubble Gem, dropped by Bubbulfrogs. Bubbulfrogs are found in caves all throughout Hyrule, and the player will want to collect as many of these as they can for one particular quest. As far as I know, every location with its entrance marked as a cave will have one Bubbulfrog inside. Once the player gets the gem, a check mark is added to that icon on the map. But there is a way to locate these caves in the overworld. First, the player needs to find that region's cherry blossom tree. Once you offer fruit to the altar, pillars of light will appear above every cave entrance in that region. This effect lasts for a while, however it does go away eventually, and the player will have to give another offering to the tree. A picture showing all of the cherry blossom tree locations is hanging on the wall of the outskirts stable. You could either take a picture of this, or once you find a cherry blossom tree, mark it on the map. As far as I know, these lights will appear regardless of whether this cave is completed or not. If there's a location far away that you might have already completed, a good idea is to place a pin there and see on the minimap if that cave already has a check mark. On the topic of caves, something you'll be coming across very frequently are breakable rock walls. Sometimes it's just layers and layers of rock which need to be chipped away at. After a while, it can get rather annoying. At first, you'll likely resort to using bomb flowers, but you'd be surprised at how many these caves use up. Most of the time, these tunnels will have a ton of swords and claymores, and what you're expected to do is fuse them to rocks and boulders to use as a hammer. Claymores are always the better option as it only takes one swing to break the rock. In fact, I recommend always having a handful of these weapons solely for the purpose of smashing ore deposits and cracked walls. But this can get incredibly tedious with tunnels blocked by layers of rock. Once you progress a certain amount in the story, you'll unlock a specific thing which can be used to smash rocks without wasting resources, but even then it's suboptimal. However, what's by far the most effective method is using a Zonai cannon. Rather than consuming materials, this uses up your battery cell. The first option is fusing it to your shield, and in most cases this will work just fine. The two issues are that you won't be able to fire the cannon perfectly straight, and as you use the cannon, it will slowly eat up the durability of the shield. Something I love doing is taking out a stabilizer, activating it, then attaching the cannon to the top of the stabilizer pointing in the direction the rocks are. This way it fires in a straight line, and all I have to do to reposition it is use Ultra Hand. The only thing to look out for is turning it back on. I like to reposition it upwards and quickly turn the device on before it topples over. You can also get away with the cannon itself, but without the stabilizer, it likes to launch itself in the opposite direction of where it's fired. Now, when it comes to the overall traversal, the addition of 2 layers above and below Hyrule's surface adds a third axis to exploration, that being the vertical navigation. Ideally, you'd always have some Zonai parts on you to make a flying machine, but that doesn't always work out for a number of reasons. Either you don't have the necessary parts to make a flying machine, or, assuming that you've only recently started playing, your battery will be very limited. The following are a few cost-efficient methods for overworld exploration. First is, obviously, Ascend. Using it allows Link to scale any structure so long as there's a ceiling. Unfortunately, this ability still feels rather limited. The fact that you need a ceiling means that this does not work in an open-air environment. The very first thing that comes to mind is fusing a rocket to a shield, and while it is common knowledge at this point, I can't stress enough how useful these things are. The fusing system has added tremendous value to shields in particular. At this point, I don't have to tell you to use these, you probably already know that. But something I can do is give you advice on how to never run out of them. Whenever I come across rockets in the overworld, I first ask myself if I'm going to use them for any Zonai devices. If the answer is no, I instinctively open up my shields page and check if there are any shields with nothing fused to them. I'll then fuse as many rockets as I can until I either run out of rockets or shields which can be fused. Doing this means that you can save any of the rockets you get from Zonai capsules for emergency purposes. At any given time, I only have 1 or 2 shields without any fusions to use for actual combat purposes. This method has allowed me to use them way more frequently without running out. One bit of advice I can give is to mark down any shrines where the rockets are supplied to solve puzzles. At this point, all you have to do is use this endless supply to fill your inventory with rocket shields. Another item introduced in Tears of the Kingdom are Hylian pine cones. These things are incredibly useful whenever you're out of rockets. Dropping one into fire creates a massive gust of wind Link can then glide into, carrying him upwards by a significant amount. Some characters and even a side quest teach you about this, but it's information that can be easily missed depending on your playstyle. Hylian pine cones are very common in the area just outside of Rito Village, close to trees and other locations. I suggest stocking up on these early on just in case something happens. The only downside is that this won't work if it's raining. Another item I frequently use are the Zonai springs. Not only can these launch Link into the air, but they can also be combined to make more powerful super springs. It's also possible to attach them to shields, and while they do give the player a boost, I don't recommend it. It's not as reliable as setting them down, and the spring will immediately disappear after a single use, in contrast to the former, where it can be reset and used multiple times. Another strategy I found useful was attaching 2 wheels to the side and fusing it to your towing harness. This creates a semi-portable spring which you can take with you, cutting back on the resources wasted. Another tip comes from this game's weapons. Weapons function a bit differently when compared to Breath of the Wild. In that game it was more about having multiple copies of the weapons with the highest attack and durability stats. And to some extent this holds true in Tears of the Kingdom, aside from one big difference. Almost every weapon now has a passive ability which is explained in the description. This sort of detail is easily missed when not paying attention. For example, some weapons will increase Link's power when he's at low health or during a flurry rush. Others, such as the Forest Dweller's Sword, allow you to reuse bursting materials that would normally be consumed upon impact. This one is pretty overpowered when combined with the Puff Shroom. Just hit an enemy with it, swap out to your main weapon, and make use of sneak strikes. Not everything has an effect, but make sure you check the description of any new weapons you pick up. The following are just a few quality of life tips worth going over when playing this game. Something that's rather tedious is the continuous scrolling when looking for a material to fuse to your arrows. In fact, once you've played for a certain amount of time, your experience is going to go something like this. Do yourself a favor and change the sorting method to most used. All you have to do is press the Y button when either the fusing menu or material inventory is open. It doesn't fully fix this problem, but it means that common items such as Brightbloom seeds, bombs, puff shrooms, and fire fruit will be at the very front. And honestly, you're only going to be using a few select items this frequently, whether it's fusing them to arrows or simply throwing them. There is the option to sort it by fuse attack power, however fusing most of these materials to arrows would be wasteful since they break on a single hit, in contrast to melee weapons. Unfortunately, the sorting option is shared between both the fusing menu and Link's inventory. Ideally, you'd have the inventory sorted by fuse attack power to quickly access items to attach to weapons, and the arrow fusion menu sorted by most used for the sake of practicality, but this means you'll have to constantly change the sorting method when needed. There's also the option to have Zonai devices at the beginning, which should be useful since normally they're at the very end. On the topic of Zonai device fusions, similar to weapons, certain parts will give arrows additional properties. The one I stumbled upon when playing involves these hoverstones. When activated, they act as a floating platform. But what's really neat is that firing one of these with an arrow will set it at the direction the arrow was fired. This is a game changer in that it lets you set up platforms to bridge across gaps. But I found another use for these devices. Once I was trying to complete a side quest, but accidentally fell off the floating island. I didn't want to fall all the way down, as it would have taken a while to get back up to where I was. I then had the idea to enter slow motion, shoot a hoverstone fuse to an arrow below me, and all of a sudden I had a makeshift platform allowing myself to recover. That's when I knew for a fact that these things were OP. Another issue that continues to plague this game is the rain, especially if you want to pass time with a campfire. However, by using the recall trick, we can light a campfire even when it's raining. All this requires is some sort of flat object. Use Ultra Hand on it, lift it up directly above your piece of wood, hold it in place for a few seconds, and release it. Now use Recall on it, and once it's covering the wood, throw a fire fruit on it. Since our object is shielding the campfire from the rain, it will stay lit up long enough for us to use it to pass the time. Let's switch it up a bit now and talk about combat. If you're about to flurry rush an enemy but don't have the right weapon equipped, you can quickly change what you're holding by bringing up the menu and swapping out weapons. This action will not cancel Link's flurry rush, and he'll now be attacking with this new weapon. A quick and easy way to set yourself up for bullet time without using up rockets or other valuable resources is to simply attach a bomb to your shield and shield surf. Doing so launches Link into the air, and the shield will protect you from the blast. Puff shrooms are overpowered if you come across big groups of enemies. Fuse one to an arrow and shoot it towards them, then simply run out and take them out via sneak strikes. Keese eyeballs are incredibly valuable in Tears of the Kingdom given that they home in on enemies, but as tempting as it is to use them on normal monsters, you should instead save them for more important fights, specifically the Gleeoks. It will make fighting them a whole lot easier. And another thing, which is almost a requirement, is pairing them with multi-shot bows obtained from Lynels. Doing so makes it so that every shot has homing properties, which is not only more powerful, but also helps save on resources. Similar to Breath of the Wild, this game gives you full control on where to go and what to do. Technically speaking, there is no correct way to go about this. However, if you're someone who cares about experiencing the story in the proper order, there are some things you need to know. I'll keep it as vague as possible to not spoil anything, but one suggestion I have for anyone playing this game is to tackle the Hebra portion first. There comes a point in the story where you'll have to choose between a number of locations, and the game will try to nudge you in this direction. The reason I suggest you do this is less about the main story, and more so because this is where you'll be picking up some of the more important quests. Just make sure to talk to as many characters as possible, as they can drop useful hints with where to go. This is the part you should skip if you don't want to hear my opinion on what order to tackle the rest of the story. I'll provide a timestamp that you can skip if you want. The very first thing you should focus on are the 4 phenomena across Hyrule. Given the dialogue of characters, the correct order seems to be the Rito, Goron, Zora, and Gerudo. As you are taking these on, you should also complete the Geoglyphs, but make sure you do these in order. You may start to feel a bit of disconnect with the story once you get to a specific geoglyph, because it's going to give you an answer to a mystery that's brought up repeatedly throughout the game. Personally speaking, I wouldn't worry too much about it since the revelation is rather obvious early on. It's also hard to give you a proper order for this since it's a question that's also constantly discussed in this game's side quests. Now, as you're working through Hyrule, I recommend ignoring any floating islands within the Faron region. Some of these will have relevance later on in the story. Once you have finished all 4 regional phenomena, continue through the main story quest until, eventually, you're set to Faron. Keep following this quest, and soon enough you'll be sent to the Sky Islands. If you've already found all the Geoglyphs, one final location will be revealed to you. Before you complete this final spot, make sure you've finished everything in that other main quest regarding Faron. At this point, feel free to finish up the Geoglyph side quest. Now is the time where you'll focus on acquiring the Master Sword. The Master Sword is weird because it's something you can and will probably find before everything else is done, given just how much the story requires you to do before getting it. If by chance you do find it, you can always come back for it later. It's not the end of the world if you get it early on, but it could spoil you on some story-related details. You could also simply skip that cutscene and watch it later on if you're worried about being spoiled. One other quest you should also be working through as you complete the main quest is one related to the depths. Technically, it's considered a side adventure, but it ties in with the main story. The good news is that this side adventure kicks off immediately after Link obtains the Autobuild ability, so as long as you do that, you won't miss it. In my opinion, there is no quote-unquote correct time to do this quest, so long as it's finished before the final boss. Completing it either before or after the Faron mission will suffice. I know it's a bit cliché, but my last tip for anyone playing Tears of the Kingdom is to take your time with the game. The amount of content packed into this game is astounding, and the last thing anyone wants to do is burn through it within a week or 2. I get that the longer it takes to beat the story, the more likely you'll get spoiled, but there's nothing wrong with taking a break from the internet for a month. And even if you do decide to focus on the main plot, there's more than enough to keep yourself occupied. Don't think for a second that the game credits mark the end of your adventure. So far I've completed the game once in my live stream, and I'm currently doing a more thorough playthrough in my spare time. And if you're worried about spoilers from my channel, I assure you that I'm still in the process of soaking in everything Tears of the Kingdom has to offer. There's plenty of mysteries and secrets I'm interested in talking about eventually, however, like with Breath of the Wild, it'll take a while before I can start writing scripts. With that said, thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, do consider subscribing to the channel for more Zelda Tears of the Kingdom related content. I've been Nintendo Black Crisis, and I'll see you all next time.